I still remember the sound my tires made when I hit the brakes that afternoon. Not because it was loud, but because everything got quiet right after. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. I had been gone for 2 days at an agricultural trade show over in Cedar Ridge. Just another weekend talking fruit varieties with people who get excited about rootstocks and irrigation systems. Nothing glamorous, just the kind of thing I enjoyed. I was about 10 minutes from home when I started feeling good about being back. I remember thinking about making coffee, checking the orchard, maybe sitting on the porch before sunset. Then I turned onto my dirt lane and saw a mountain of shredded wood sitting where it had no business being. At first I thought maybe one of the neighboring farms had dumped storm debris in the wrong place. Then I saw a branch, then another, then a section of trunk that looked way too familiar. I pulled over so hard the truck nearly slid sideways. By the time I got out, I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. My name is Wyatt Mercer, and for 12 years I built what was probably one of the strangest private orchards in Western Tennessee. Not the biggest, not the most profitable, definitely not the smartest financial decision I've ever made. But it was mine. Every tree had a story attached to it. Some people collect cars. Some people collect guns. I collected fruit trees from places most folks around here couldn't find on a map. White peaches from Japan, finger limes from Australia, black sapote from Mexico, a rare crimson mango variety that took me nearly 4 years to legally import and establish. People used to joke that my orchard looked like the United Nations with leaves. I didn't care. Those trees meant something to me. After my wife, Emily, passed away from cancer 13 years ago, the orchard became the thing that got me out of bed every morning. Grief is a strange animal. Some days it sits quietly beside you. Other days it jumps out of nowhere and tears into your chest. Planting trees gave me something grief couldn't take away. Trees don't care about your bad days. They just keep growing. So I kept planting. One tree became 10. 10 became 50. 50 became a small paradise hidden behind my farmhouse. And for a long time, life stayed simple. Then the developer showed up. The property east of mine had been sitting empty for years. Just rolling pasture land with a few old barns falling apart. Most of us assumed it would stay that way. Then one morning a convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, followed by survey crews. A month later signs appeared advertising a luxury community called Willow Creek Estates. Apparently wealthy folks from Nashville wanted country views without actually living around farmers. Funny how that works. At first I tried being neighborly. The company representative, a polished guy named Brent Holloway, came by my place carrying brochures and a smile so perfect it looked rented. He shook my hand and told me they were excited to join the community. I remember asking, "You planning to keep the creek protected?" He laughed and said, "We're committed to preserving the natural character of the area." Looking back, that should have been my first warning. Whenever somebody uses the phrase natural character in a sales pitch, they're usually about to bulldoze it. Construction started 3 months later. The problems started immediately. Bulldozers crossed sections of my fence line. Trucks parked in front of my access road. Workers dumped gravel dangerously close to irrigation channels feeding the orchard. Every time I complained, somebody apologized. Every time they apologized, it happened again. One afternoon, I found a foreman smoking beside a row of young citrus trees. I walked over and said, "You realize that's private property, right?" He barely looked up. "Just temporary." That phrase became their favorite answer. Just temporary. The blocked roads were temporary. The damaged fencing was temporary. The heavy equipment sitting on my grass was temporary. Funny thing about temporary problems. If nobody stops them, they become permanent. The tension kept building for months. My neighbors noticed it too. Folks at the diner started asking questions. One evening, old Earl Dawson, who'd farmed here longer than anyone alive, leaned across the counter and said, "Those city boys think money makes boundaries disappear." At the time I laughed. Turns out Earl was being optimistic. Because money wasn't the problem. Arrogance was. The week before everything happened, I had one final conversation with Brent. I remember it clearly because he stood there wearing expensive loafers in a muddy construction zone like he was posing for a magazine cover. I pointed toward a bulldozer parked suspiciously close to my orchard and said, You better make sure your people know where my property starts. He smiled that same polished smile and replied, Wyatt, we're professionals. We know exactly where the property line is. 3 days later, I came home and discovered exactly how wrong that statement was. Standing there among broken trunks and shredded branches felt like attending a funeral where somebody had buried half your family. Trees I'd spent over a decade nurturing were gone. Not damaged. Not trimmed. Gone. Fresh tire tracks carved through the soil. Sap still dripped from splintered wood. The air smelled like gasoline and destruction. I dropped to my knees without even realizing it. I picked up a branch from a Japanese peach tree Emily had helped me plant before she got sick. Half the bark had been ripped away. I just sat there staring at it. And something changed inside me. The sadness didn't disappear. It hardened. And when I finally stood back up, I wasn't thinking about grief anymore. I was thinking about names, paperwork, boundaries, and consequences. Because whoever did this had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and they didn't even know it yet. The next morning, I drove straight to the construction site before the sun was fully up. I didn't call ahead. I didn't make an appointment. I just parked my truck in front of their temporary office trailer and walked inside. The foreman was there pouring coffee like it was any other day. When he saw me, he gave me a look that said he already knew why I was there. We had authorization, he said before I even opened my mouth. Not hello, not good morning, just that. We had authorization. I stared at him for a few seconds and asked, Authorization from who? He shrugged. Survey crew marked the area. We followed instructions. Then Brent Holloway appeared from a back office carrying a tablet. Calm, relaxed, almost bored. Wyatt, he said, I understand you're upset. I remember laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because upset was such a ridiculous word for what I was feeling. Upset, I said. You cut down half my orchard. Brent tapped his tablet and turned the screen toward me. According to our survey, that section falls within property acquired during the development purchase. I looked at the map for maybe 2 seconds. Then I looked right back at him. You're wrong. His smile tightened. Our surveyors are highly qualified. Good, I replied, because mine are about to get paid. I walked out before he could answer. The drive home felt different. The grief was still there, but now it had direction. Anger without direction burns you alive. Anger with direction becomes fuel. That afternoon, I climbed into the loft of my old barn and started digging through boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Dust covered everything. Old tax records, equipment manuals, family photos, receipts from businesses that no longer existed. Then I found what I was looking for. My grandfather had been one of those people who documented everything. If he bought a shovel in 1972, there was probably a receipt somewhere proving it. By midnight, I had stacks of paperwork spread across a folding table. Original county plats, agricultural permits, irrigation approvals, property tax assessments stretching back decades. The next day, I hired a licensed surveyor named Rebecca Shaw. Rebecca was the kind of person who could probably win arguments with a calculator. She spent 2 full days reviewing documents before ever stepping onto the property. On the 3rd morning, she arrived with her crew. By afternoon, bright orange stakes began appearing across the landscape. One by one, they marked the true boundary line. I followed behind them in my pickup, watching the pattern emerge. By sunset, the picture was clear. Every destroyed tree sat inside my property. Not barely inside, not inches over the line. The closest stump was 14 feet inside my boundary, so we're nearly 30 feet in. Rebecca handed me a report and said, whoever approved that clearing either ignored the survey or never checked one in the first place. News travels fast in small towns. Apparently, it travels even faster when expensive mistakes are involved. Less than 24 hours later, Brent was back at my house. This time, he wasn't smiling. There seems to be a discrepancy, he said. No, Olivia. A discrepancy is when a restaurant gets your order wrong. This is trespassing. He asked if we could work something out privately. That was the first sign of panic. The second sign arrived when state agricultural officials got involved. During the survey process, Rebecca noticed something I hadn't even considered. Several of the destroyed trees were registered under a rare agricultural preservation program. Years earlier, I'd enrolled certain imported species because they were difficult to replace and valuable from a conservation standpoint. I honestly forgot half the paperwork existed. The state hadn't forgotten. Once inspectors reviewed the destruction reports, the situation escalated quickly. Penalties started being discussed. Investigations started opening. Lawyers started making phone calls. Everyone around town assumed I was about to sue. Honestly, I assumed that too. But then something unexpected happened. One evening, my attorney, Martin Keene, called me. Martin had handled land issues for farming families across 3 counties. He spoke slowly, dressed like it was still 1985, and never wasted words. "Wyatt," he said, "I found something interesting." That's usually a dangerous sentence when a lawyer says it. The next morning, I met him at his office. He spread several documents across his desk and pointed toward an old easement agreement. "Do you recognize this?" I did. Sort of. My father had mentioned it years ago. Back in the late 70s, neighboring landowners needed temporary access for utility work and agricultural equipment. An agreement was signed allowing limited use across a narrow strip of our property. Nothing unusual, except for one detail. Martin tapped a specific paragraph. "Read that line." I did. Then I read it again. "Revocable easement." My eyes lifted slowly. "You're telling me?" Martin nodded. "The main access road entering Willow Creek Estates crosses land you still own." I leaned back in the chair. "And the easement can be revoked?" "Immediately." For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Martin smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. "You know," he said, "most people think lawsuits are the most effective form of leverage. They're not." I asked. "Not even close." The paperwork was filed that same week. Legally. Properly. By the book. No shortcuts. No tricks. No loopholes. Just enforcement of rights that had existed for decades. The effect was almost immediate. Construction ground to a halt so fast it felt unreal. Concrete deliveries got turned away. Utility contractors stopped showing up. Dump trucks sat idling while supervisors argued into cell phones. Then came the real damage. Willow Creek Estates had already started selling homes. Prospective buyers were visiting model properties every day. Except now the primary entrance route was no longer available. Traffic backups stretched down county roads. Realtors stood outside, trying to explain the situation without actually explaining it. Security guards redirected vehicles through muddy temporary access paths that looked more suitable for cattle than luxury homeowners. I watched some of the chaos from a lawn chair across the road. Not because I was celebrating. At least that's what I told myself. The truth is, after what happened to the orchard, watching consequences unfold felt strangely therapeutic. One afternoon, Brent pulled in my driveway again. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, shirt wrinkled. The polished confidence was gone. "What do you want?" he asked. "My tree's back." He sighed. "That's impossible." Then we're both dealing with impossible situations. He stood there silently for a moment. "You're enjoying this?" I thought about that question longer than he probably expected. Then I answered honestly. "No, I would have enjoyed harvesting peaches next summer. This is just what happens when people decide my property doesn't matter." Brent left without another word. For the first time since everything started, I felt like the balance of power had shifted. But I wasn't done looking through records. And that's when I stumbled across the discovery that changed everything. While reviewing county zoning maps connected to the easement dispute, I noticed a classification attached to a small parcel beside the subdivision entrance. My parcel. According to historical records, the land qualified for agricultural tourism and educational exhibition use. At first, it didn't mean much. Then I started reading deeper. Then I called the zoning office. Then I called Martin. By the end of the conversation, both of us were laughing. Because somewhere between old county ordinances and forgotten land use regulations, I had just found a way to make sure nobody entering that luxury subdivision would ever forget what happened to my orchard. Now, before anybody jumps into the comments and says I was obsessed or vindictive, let me explain something. When people destroy something you've spent years building, the natural reaction is to want them to feel what you felt. The problem is that most forms of revenge are messy, illegal, or stupid. What I discovered was something much better. It was legal, permanent, and impossible for them to ignore. The zoning office confirmed it. The permits were available. The paperwork was straightforward. As long as I followed the regulations, I could establish an educational agricultural exhibit on that parcel of land beside the subdivision entrance. The same entrance now trapped behind an easement dispute. The same entrance every potential buyer had to pass. The moment I hung up the phone, the idea was already fully formed in my head. 30 days later, construction crews were back on my property, but this time they were working for me. People driving by started slowing down to stare. First came a massive steel sign, then concrete walkways, then display structures. The sign went up on a bright Saturday morning and could be seen from half a mile away. It read, "The Heritage Orchard Preservation Museum." Simple, professional, completely legal, and located directly beside the entrance to Willow Creek Estates. The developers nearly lost their minds. Brent called me before the sign was even fully installed. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." I looked at the workers tightening bolts on the steel frame and said, "Depend what you think it is." He didn't laugh. Neither did I. Over the next several weeks, the museum took shape. We carefully recovered every major trunk section that had survived the clearing operation. Some pieces weighed hundreds of pounds. Each one was mounted upright and preserved. Beside every display stood an engraved plaque listing the species, age, origin, and estimated replacement value. There was the Japanese white peach Emily and I planted together. There was the rare finger lime that took 3 years to establish. There was the crimson mango tree people used to stop and photograph because they couldn't believe it existed in Tennessee soil. Large weatherproof panels displayed photographs of the orchard before destruction. Row after row of healthy trees, blooming branches, harvest days, family gatherings. Then beside those images came photographs of the aftermath. Splintered trunks, tire tracks, broken irrigation lines. Visitors didn't need anyone to explain the story. The pictures did that on their own. My favorite addition came from a retired sound engineer who lived nearby. He volunteered after hearing about the situation. Hidden speakers were installed along the museum path. Nothing obnoxious, nothing loud, just a subtle audio track that occasionally played distant chainsaw sounds mixed with bird song and wind. The effect was eerie. You wouldn't consciously notice it at first. Then suddenly you'd realize what you were hearing. Every person walking through that exhibit felt it. And every single prospective homebuyer entering Willow Creek Estate saw it. At first, the developers tried pretending the museum didn't exist. Their marketing materials cropped it out of photographs. Their sales agents avoided discussing it. That strategy lasted about 2 weeks. Then social media got involved. Someone posted drone footage comparing the destroyed orchard to the museum displays. The video spread across local groups, then regional groups. Then news outlets started calling. Reporters showed up. Bloggers showed up. Preservation advocates showed up. Even people who knew absolutely nothing about agriculture became fascinated by the story. The museum became an attraction. School groups visited. Gardening clubs visited. Tourists stopped by during road trips. Meanwhile, every luxury home tour began with an uncomfortable question. What happened there? Realtors tried explaining. Buyers searched online. The internet filled in the details. Online reviews became brutal. Not because people hated the houses. The homes were actually beautiful. They hated the story attached to them. One review described the entrance as driving through a monument to corporate arrogance. Another called it the most expensive apology tour in Tennessee. My personal favorite simply said, the museum was more interesting than the model home. Contracts started falling apart. Prospective buyers backed out. Investors got nervous. Delays grew longer. Costs grew higher. Every week that passed seemed to make the situation worse. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, nearly 2 months after the museum opened, a convoy of vehicles pulled into my driveway. Not construction trucks, not lawyers, executives, real executives, men and women who had probably never expected to spend their morning standing in wet grass beside a farmer's porch. Brent was there too, although he looked more like a hostage than a representative. We sat around my kitchen table, drinking coffee. Nobody smiled. Nobody made small talk. Finally, one of the executives cleared his throat and said, "We'd like to discuss a resolution." Funny how language changes when money starts disappearing. They didn't talk about surveys anymore. They didn't talk about misunderstandings. They didn't talk about temporary inconveniences. They talked about accountability. Over the next several weeks, an agreement took shape. They paid for a complete restoration project. Mature replacement trees were imported from specialty growers around the world. Agricultural experts were hired to maximize survival rates. The company covered every state penalty connected to the destruction. They funded long-term preservation measures for the orchard and established a conservation endowment to help protect rare species in the future. On paper, it was everything I could have wanted. Friends kept asking if I felt victorious. The truth is, victory wasn't really the right word. You don't win when something irreplaceable gets destroyed. You just try to salvage what remains. Some of those original trees were gone forever. No amount of money could change that. But standing in the orchard months later, watching new growth emerge where devastation once stood, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not complete peace. Maybe not even permanent peace. But enough. Enough to sit on the porch in the evening and enjoy the view again. Enough to remember Emily without immediately thinking about loss. Enough to believe the orchard still had a future. The developers assumed that once the settlement was finalized, the museum would disappear. Several executives politely suggested it. One even offered to help fund relocation. I declined every single time. The museum stayed exactly where it was. And honestly, that's the part people argue about the most. Some folks say I should have removed it after the agreement. Others say keeping it there was the entire point. Maybe they're both right. Maybe neither is. All I know is history has a funny way of repeating itself when people work too hard to erase it. Today, visitors still stop by. Kids still read the plaques. Homebuyers still drive past the displays. The orchard is growing again. The subdivision is occupied. Life moved forward, but the reminder remains. Not because I wanted revenge forever, because some lessons deserve a permanent address. And every now and then, when I see someone standing quietly in front of those preserved trunks, reading the story from beginning to end, I think about that afternoon when I came home and found everything destroyed. The developers thought they were clearing land for a road. What they actually cleared was any chance of people forgetting what happened there. Now I'm curious what you think. If you had been in my position, would you have taken the settlement and removed the museum? Or would you have left it standing as a permanent reminder? Was keeping it there justice, or was it going too far? Let me know down in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with powerful people who thought they could ignore boundaries until consequences showed up, share your story too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next one.